All right, guys. So we are looking at Japanese imperialism and how that impacted on the militarism in Japan. All right. So the learning outcome is to identify and examine how Japanese democracy was undermined and why it collapsed in 1932. All right. So why did authoritarianism persist? Couple of reasons why. All right. So, first one, the role of the emperor. The emperor could still exert influence on political life. Constitution enshrined Hirohito as both sacred and sovereign, and he believed that the monarchy stood at the apex of the constitutional order, meaning that he was pretty much always going to be at the top. Okay. This all meant that the emperor's views were taken seriously in 1927 and 28, and he forced PM Tanaka Gichi to resign his post due to his poor handling of military adventurism in China. Okay. Therefore, elites could shape foreign policy through their manipulation of the emperor's will. Now, just with this one, just want you to know the key points that you need to know are the parts that are highlighted in different colors. Okay, so if you can think of role of emperor was sacred and sovereign, and he was at the apex of the constitutional order. Yeah, don't need to write every single word down if you can just remember it from those highlighted ones. If you don't think you are going to be able to remember that, then of course feel free to write it all down. All right, why did authoritarianism persist? Continued. So the independent military, according to the Constitution, the military and bureaucracy bore no accountability to Parliament. Okay, so if you consider the defence of Australia, it is directly linked to the government. Okay, they can tell them when they want them to fight, if they want them to fight, whereas the independent military in Japan did not need any government approval. The military leaders thus used this as a license to act independently of the Prime Minister and Parliament. Thus, they increasingly did, beginning with the assassination of Zhang Zuolin in 1928, through to the invasion of Manchuria in 1931, and later the Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937. Okay, again, same thing. All right, the senior statesmen or the genro. This group of elder statesmen, mostly former politicians and military leaders, exerted a huge influence on the entire political culture. Through custom and informal influence, they would advise the emperor on choice of prime minister. Thus, throughout the 1920s, prime ministers continued to be appointed by the elites according to their criteria, okay, which is obviously different to how we elect prime ministers, in that it's a voting system where everyone participates. Then you've got political terror. Even in the 1920s, political terror compromised parliamentary government on a regular basis. PM Harakei was assassinated in 1921 and attempt on emperor in 1923 when he was regent. Hara's assassin was angered by perceived corruption. Hirohito's was a left-wing activist. Okay. Public opinion often favoured the attackers, which set a dangerous precedent for influencing politics. So despite moves towards greater democratization, authoritarianism was embedded in the Constitution. Okay, so they wanted to become a democracy, what we have now, but unfortunately, due to the social attitudes and situation in Japan, authoritarianism was actually embedded legally. Yeah. Political power thus rested with those elites from the military, business, and royal family who only allowed democracy to function when it suited them. Therefore, the social order was maintained as long as the elites were in an agreement. Okay? So pretty much what it's saying is that the elites, they were the ones that were leading the country. The influence of economic and social issues. So whilst Japanese democracy already faced rising reactionary authoritarianism, economic and social challenges in the 1920s would catalyze these trends, culminating in the decline of parliamentary democracy by 1932. All right. So what that's pretty much saying is that the economic and social challenges were pretty much the reason for the decline of parliamentary democracy. During the First World War, Japan had benefited from an economic boom as its industries increasingly supplied the preoccupied Western nations. Exports increased dramatically. So then if we think back to the Great Depression, that is then of course going to have had an impact when international trade stopped due to the Great Depression. Okay, resulting in Japan then having economic hardship. Yet, after the war, there was a slump as demand fell. The price of rice also crashed, which impacted on farmers. These trends excavated inequality within Japan, especially between the rural and urban divide. By 1927, farming family income was just 70% of what office workers earned. Okay, so thinking about city workers in comparison to farmers. The 1927 banking crisis further damaged small businesses. This fostered increasing dissatisfaction with the mainstream parties, as many sought solutions in ultra-nationalist beliefs. All right. The 1929 Wall Street crash and depression then served to bring these tensions to a head. Exports fell by 6% from 1929 to 1931, and unemployment rose to 1 million. We already know the cause of that, yeah? This only served to increasingly radicalize the population, with international trade falling. Calls for expansion in China to capture its own imperial market became increasingly seductive to the elites. This idea had the benefit of freeing Japan from an over-reliance on British and American imports, as well as solving overpopulation within Japan, because it meant that they would be able to travel overseas in order to work, okay? The growing ultra-nationalism. By December 1931, Japan had taken over the province, renaming it Manchukuo. PM Inukai Tsuyoshi was forced to accept the takeover, and he failed to punish those responsible. On 15th of May 1932, he was also assassinated in an attempted coup. It failed, but it caused democracy to end. Prince Seionji and military leaders refused to allow the Seikai to form a new cabinet. So that's forming a new government, effectively. In an attempt to end the wave of assassinations and placate the extreme right, Admiral Saito Makoto was appointed as PM of a national unity cabinet. Only 5 out of 15 ministers were actually from political parties. Okay, the rest were made up of the elites elsewhere. So why did democracy not actually succeed in Japan? So the political reason was that the Meiji Constitution carried within it too much ambiguity, which allowed conservative elites to oppose greater democratization and enabled the army to act independently. Right? So that just means that it wasn't clear. Yeah, it wasn't like This is exactly how you need to manage or control this situation. It was like, well, here you can do this potentially, or here you could do that. The economic reasons was rapid industrialization had created a cleavage in society between economic winners and losers, often split by rural and urban. This undermined confidence in government. Yeah. Again, this one is pretty much what you already know. Social, cultural, the rapid improvement in education and westernization in urban areas led to an increasing divide between those urban and rural people, the population, which ultra nationalists exploited. Okay, and then you've got the nice and simple little diagram there. So, political, the Great Depression, which then led to the assassinations in Manchuria, which then led to the end of parliamentary democracy in Japan.